This screencast is to support teaching Lesson 11 of Language to Go Intermediate. The full reference is Language to Go Intermediate by R. Wileman, W-I-L-E-M-A-N, and A. Crace, C-R-A-C-E, Longman 2004. You're going to need a few things for this lesson. Here's the student's book page. There's also an audio file, a single page of teacher's book notes, a grammar reference from the back of the student's book, and I've got the tape script here as well, so it's at the back of the student's book, lesson 11, determination. You can see it here, 4 different short recordings. So what to do with it, really? There's quite a lot of different ways you can adapt and use this material, so I'll try and make those adaptations clear as we go through. So we'll start off by looking at the vocabulary and speaking section. So the main aim here is to teach/revise this set of vocabulary here in the box. Okay. There's a few different ways you can do it. Depends how much you want to pre-teach or whether you want to see what your students know. So one potential option is to look at the first exercise, look at the picture of this chap here and discuss the questions. Where is he? What's he doing? How do you think he feels about smoking, coffee and the internet? Now, as you elicit ideas about those things, what you can do is try to steer your students towards eliciting the word addicted or addict, one of the words, and then you could elicit the other parts of it. So you could say, what's the name for the noun for the person? That's an addict. What about the noun for the thing itself? Really needing cigarettes, really needing chocolate, really needing drugs. It's an addiction. Yeah. And you could even elicit the fact that we are addicted to something. Okay. That way you will have pre-taught a few of the words in the box already. At this point, you could just let the students go and let them have a go at the gap fill here. And then you could monitor that closely and see which ones they have difficulty with to focus on in the feedback at the end. If you wanted to pre-teach a few, then that's another way to go. So what you could do is look at the words in the box, think, I'm going to deal with addicted, addiction and addict through the lead-in. And then you'll think, right, for the other words, I'll create a little matching task, maybe with the words down one side and the meanings down the other side, and the students have to match them together and then check the answers to that task, and then let them have a go at this more difficult closed task. Think about what the students need to know about this vocabulary. They need to know the meaning, the form and the pronunciation. Meaning and pronunciation is fairly simple. Think about word stress, think about difficult sounds, difficult meanings. But when you're thinking about form, think about how they work in a sentence. So we've already mentioned you're addicted to something. What about dependent? You are dependent. Okay. Which ones are nouns? Which ones are verbs? Yep. Give up. That's a phrasal verb. So how do we use it? Do you just give up, or do you give up smoking? Do you give up smoke? Do you give up to smoke? So think about the form there. Same with cut down. So if I smoke 20 cigarettes and I want to cut down, what does that mean? Does that mean completely stop or not? So the meaning is tricky. And also you can cut down on smoking or cut down on the number of cupcakes you eat a day. Okay, so there's a lot going on with this vocabulary. It might seem simple at first sight, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So think about how much of it you want to pre-teach before students try this gap fill here. If you think your students are going to struggle with the gap fill, you could change this task and make it into single sentences with gaps. That would be easier than having it in a paragraph format. Also, you could fill in a few of the words to make it less difficult. Something I would definitely do is make sure that these numbers that are there on the gaps are nice and clear. Otherwise, the feedback gets really tricky. You want to be able to say, what's number 3, what's number 4, not reading the whole thing over and over again. Okay. At the end of that, there is a little speaking task. Discuss the following questions. Are addictions a bad thing? What things can be addictive? That's nice. Seems a little bit limited. You could extend it out. Maybe talk about their country. So in your countries, are there any addictions that cause problems? How about in the UK? What do you think? You know, things like that. Extend that number 3 to activate some of this vocabulary here. So we've got a listening task here. This listening provides the context for the grammar. So if for some reason this listening doesn't get taught in the lesson, it means that the person teaching the grammar is going to have to come up with a different context. So just bear that in mind. If you remove the listening, then you need to replace this context with something else. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But if you're going to include the listening, it's quite a nice one. Nice little chart. I would say there's 4 people talking. First time they listen, I'd get them to fill in the first 2 columns. So what is the addiction? And have they given up? Just keep the task nice and simple. So play all 4 all the way through. Then get the students to talk together. Get them to talk to see what they know, and that'll quickly show you whether you need to play it again or not. Then check the answers to what is the addiction, what have they given up, and then say, right, now I'm going to play it again, and I want you to listen for any details that you get. Obviously, this box is far too small, so I want to think about how this task looks. And then play number 1, stop, get the students to talk together, and then check together, and then you could do 2, 3, 4 all in one go. Make sure they do get the chance to confer with each other before feedback from you, the teacher. It's probably a good idea to have a slide or some way of making the answers to this visible or visual, if you like. Sometimes if you just do oral feedback, the students will miss the answers. There are 4 different speakers here, so if you're looking for a way of cutting down this part of the lesson, you could just do 2 of them. Equally, because it's 4 separate people speaking, you can turn this into a reading task. You can give them the short texts and get them to do the same task as is here. What's the addiction? Have they given it up? What details you can do. So same task, but done as a reading. And again, you don't have to do all 4. You could do 1 or 2. So there's a lot of different ways of doing this particular task. One other way might be a jigsaw reading, where you put students into different rooms and they read about one of the people with a task. This task is fine. And then they come back together and they pair up with somebody who's read a different text, and they tell the other person what they found out about that text. It's called a jigsaw reading. Or listening. However way you want to do it. People read or listen to different things, and then they come together and explain them to each other. It's a nice way of introducing quite a good speaking element into a reading or listening lesson. All right, so here's the grammar stage. It's quite a decent attempt at guided discovery here, so I think it's pretty good. Just needs a little bit of expanding, I think. So these sentences in the box, they come from the listening. So as I said before, if you haven't used the listening, then you need to replace that context. So you'd need to maybe create a context about you, the teacher. I do one about myself when I used to live in New Zealand. I just show them some pictures and then I give them some sentences about me at that time. So here they ask you to look at the tape script and fill in the gaps. I mean, if you don't want to do that, you could just have these as complete sentences. There's no problem with that at all. So complete sentences, one example with would and 3 examples with used to. We've got a positive, a negative and a question form. And that's important for used to because the spelling is a big issue, and we do also use it quite a lot in the question and the negative form, whereas would we tend to use more in the positive. We don't tend to use it in the negative and the question form with this particular meaning. I think students are going to have heard used to, they're going to know used to a certain extent. They are not going to know about the use of would probably, and they'll be surprised by it because they will have met would in lots of different situations. So you want the students to be thinking through the grammar, and that's what this activity is attempting to do. So questions 1, 2 and 3 are trying to get the students to think about these sentences and about the meaning and the form. And that's also this lovely chart at the bottom. It builds up quite well. So what do I think is missing? I think focus on form is missing. That's probably about it, really. So I think you just need to make sure that this guided discovery task, these 1, 2, and 3 questions, focus on meaning and also on form. So I think it needs expanding a little bit. But I would certainly get the students working on this by themselves first and then talking together so you can hear the levels of knowledge in the room. You could even break them up into different rooms if you want them in smaller groups so more people are able to speak. While they're talking about the task, you need to listen, see where you think they're at, where do the problem areas lie, and then feedback will be a clarification stage, focusing on the answers to the guided discovery and building up a clear picture of meaning and form. You're going to need to focus on pronunciation as well. Used to, the week 2 is tricky. With would, we usually contract it. So there's quite a lot of work to be done here on meaning, form and pronunciation. Make the students do as much of it as you possibly can. So then we want to provide as much practice as we can possibly cram in. Exercise 6 is a good control practice task. It's quite tricky. Students are going to need a little bit of time to do it. I think it's a good task. Do a couple of really clear examples, work through them together, take your time, and then let the students work alone to do the other sentences. And then again, get them talking to compare. It'll help you to notice where problem areas lie. Feedback's got to be visual. You'll have to have these sentences typed out or be typing onto a Word document, something like that. Students will need to see the answers. Notice B, it's very important that we focus on would as well as used to, okay? So these are all completed using used to or not. And then here, in which sentences could you also use would? It's really important to bring that rule home because remember, that's probably going to be the new information they're taking from this lesson. We then want to put them into some freer practice. The idea in the book is to write a naughty or funny thing you used to do when you were younger. I just can't wrap my head around this. It just doesn't work for me. Students probably would be nice if they could be talking about themselves personally, but a lot of our ESOL students and a lot of people in general don't like talking about the past. Depends on your life. So you've got a few options here. You could get them talking about life before lockdown. I think that could be interesting. What did you used to do each day? Are there any things that you do now that you didn't do then? You could give them a model yourself of what you used to do and didn't used to do before lockdown and how your life was different. Remember to include an example of would as well. Or you could provide them with profiles of people, maybe a photo of somebody, and a few things that they used to do or that they would do in the past. And then the student needs to talk about or write about that person, just taking away the personal from our ESOL students that might not particularly want to talk about their own pasts. Okay, but we want to get them into a freer situation, get them making mistakes, get them talking either about themselves and their family pre-lockdown or about a made-up person where you've given them some prompts of things that they could say. Listen out, get them talking in small groups, listen, and give them some delayed correction afterwards. Okay, so they'll need preparation time to think about what they're going to say and to write notes. Then they'll need the chance to do it and then hopefully to do it again. If you can build in some repetition, then that will build fluency. And then a correction slot at the end. Okay, so that having been said, there's quite a lot going on in this lesson, but I think it's all going to be very useful for the students. Enjoy.